Welcome to the Woman of Faith and Purpose podcast. I am so excited because today we have a special guest with us, and I want to introduce you to Tamira Hamilton. She is a seasoned sales and marketing professional, Pinterest expert, entrepreneur, and the visionary creator behind the Luminary Path. Can't wait to hear all about that. With more than 3 decades of experience, including a career with Fortune 100 companies, she brings a powerful blend of business strategy, marketing expertise, and lived experience. Tamira's journey from single motherhood to entrepreneurship has shaped her passion for helping others unlock their potential, strengthen their mindset, and build businesses with greater clarity and intention. I'm excited for the wisdom, faith, and purpose that she's going to bring to the conversation today. Please join me in welcoming Tamara Hamilton. Welcome, Tamara.
Well, thank you for having me. That was a beautiful intro. I'm like, who is she talking about?
Ah, she's talking about you, girl.
Oh, that was awesome. That is very inspiring. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Well, you deserve every bit of it based upon what I know about you and the conversations that we've been having. So, I just want to start off by saying that I met you in a networking community and you showed up on screen so beautifully. You had so much value to share with the audience that I said, well, I have to get to know you. And so we had a lovely
We
conversation
did.
the other day, and I said, I have to have you on this podcast. You have so much to share that I think will be so valuable to the audience. And so, I'm just going to go ahead and get started if that's okay with you.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited to be here and very grateful to you for the opportunity and the fact that you saw something in me and wanted me to be here. So I'm very excited and
Oh,
looking forward to this.
absolutely. I not only, I'm going to just say this, not only did I want you on the podcast, I wanted you as an accountability partner. So that's how
That's
much,
right. Mhm.
that's how much we connected. All right. So let's start off with the first question. I want to know a little bit about your background and what led you to create the Luminary Path. And tell us just a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so we have to go back to my childhood because it all, as you know, it all tends to run together and different events and parts of your story inspire you to take different paths, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was very fortunate in that I was tagged as gifted and talented very early on.
Does
And
not surprise
so,
me.
oh, thank you. But it definitely has led me to various opportunities. And I would even say some privilege in my life, and I was very fortunate to grow up in a single mother led household. I did have access to my father, but I day by day lived in a very strong, independent, single woman led household. My
Mm-hmm.
grandparents, all of them, were very instrumental in my life. And so I was always taught that I have to, and I think we talked about this, I was always taught that I have to work at least 3 times as hard as everyone else, and that's a huge part of my story because it's both benefited me and also kind of been to my detriment, as I think a
Yeah,
lot of us are finding
yeah.
today. And so being tagged as gifted and talented and having access to a lot of those opportunities, one of them was an opportunity to participate in a paid internship
Mm-hmm.
just 2 weeks out of high school. And to back up just a little bit, I turned 18 one Tuesday my senior year, and while all my classmates were gathering and taking the big class photo of everyone that was graduating, my best friend, my dad, and I were at the hospital, and I was delivering a 7 pound, 11 ounce
Wow.
daughter. So I turned 18 one Tuesday, had her the next. And I can proudly say she's seen me graduate high school and get my bachelor's degree and multiple master's degrees.
Wow.
And so it's always been about knowing that I was having this little girl, and I pretty much assumed, and correctly so, that I would be the one responsible for her financially,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, spiritually, and making sure that she grows up to be a good person and a productive member of society. It's always been about living my life in a way that lights up the path for her. And
Mm.
then I had a second daughter 1 year after graduating from undergraduate. So despite the fact that I had this little girl my senior year in high school, I was still able to attend college that next fall and graduate in 4 years. And I had this opportunity to work at a major consumer product goods company that's headquartered right
Mhm.
here in my city, a little small town, Wisconsin. Back then, it was about 90,000 people here. And I actually grew up walking past this place for years and going to school with a lot of kids whose parents worked there. And so I had the opportunity to, right out of high school, go and work in what I was going to be majoring in, which was marketing and on a major consumer brand. And that has
Wow.
played such an important part of my life. I was disappointed that I didn't get to work there and for them once I got my degree,
Hmm.
but it has really fueled my career because it gave me an opportunity to not only go to school by day, because they wound up having me stay throughout the school year too, right before my sophomore year of undergraduate. I had the opportunity to not only read about return on capital expenditures and all of these fancy terms, but then I was just so happened to go to work after class and be sitting in a boardroom, in a conference room, and see spreadsheets with return on capital expenditure and hear people who were top in their field talk about this. So it gave me a much deeper understanding and application because information plus application equals transformation. And so I've
Yeah.
always considered that a leg up. So my career in corporate spanned over 20 years, close to 25 years, and I kept seeing the same pattern. I go in, I work hard, I outperform everybody, but other people are getting promoted ahead of me who are doing a lot less than me. And of course, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't be overachieving. I would go in and perform at the same level as everyone
Yeah.
else. And so I saw this pattern, and eventually, near the 25-year mark, I got a little tired of that because at this point, we're at my peak. I've got some fancy titles and got my MBA, and I've promoted 18 people in 3 years.
Wow.
And everyone's I see people getting promoted and getting bigger opportunities than I am, who've done less than I am. And so I'm pretty not only burned out because I'm going through some double whammy of grief, lost two very close family members within a month of each other, and that really transformed me and sent me on this journey. And I said I can't take it anymore. I had to leave, and I did. So I exited corporate America and was determined to make it on my own. It's definitely had its share of ups and downs, but I like to look at it as learnings. And I initially partnered with a company and represented them in their products and went around the country and taught people sales and marketing for their products and saw some of that same pattern there and
Hmm.
left. And after that, I really wanted to examine me. I had to look at Tamira and figure out why is not only this same path following you from company to company, but also noticing some of the same themes as far as feeling used, abused, overworked, underpaid, playing out in relationships
Wow.
with men. So I had to do some really deep work. And a lot of that culminated in the last 2 to 3 years. And so I was inspired with seeing and knowing what was coming with the change in the executive branch of this country, really tuning into that and knowing that in 2008, 2009, when there was the mortgage crisis, how I led a team to victory when we had my hand tied behind my back because we were overworked, understaffed, and we beat out our peer group we were like second in our peer group of
Yeah.
when you get stacked, and we did it with a lot less resources. And
Hmm.
looking back, I now know I was actually being set up to fail, but we
Hmm.
know how that works. And so here we are. And I decide to create a program because I know that there are women out there who need that type of leadership that can lead
Hmm.
them through the storm and they see victory on the other side of it. I saw it as a very unique skill set and that God had given me that experience for a reason. And that's how I created the Luminary Path. So that's a very long winded answer.
Wow. Okay. There's just so much there to unpack. And I don't know if I'm going to remember it all, but I want to touch on some of the themes that I'm hearing. So the very first thing that you said was that I was fortunate to grow up in a single
Absolutely.
parent
Yes.
household. And you know what I found really, really interested about that is that society is going to tell you that you're disadvantaged coming out the gate because you didn't have your father in the home. You may have known him, but he wasn't there. He
Right.
wasn't the primary breadwinner. He wasn't the role model for you. Your mother was. And if I know anything about single parent households, because at some point that was my experience as well, she was probably mother and father. She probably did everything for you.
She did.
And then you said something about your grandparents. So you
Yeah.
also had that extended family to support you.
Yes.
So I just want to hear a little bit about how you think that shaped you. And I have some other questions. So let's start with
Okay.
that one.
Well, it definitely, I don't run around saying it like I used to, the strong, independent Black woman, but
Hmm.
it definitely turned me into a strong, independent Black
Right.
woman because it's the piece I haven't yet mentioned is I also had a full and still have a fully disabled brother. So
Mm.
unfortunately, I was parentified and at
Okay.
a very young age, called to step up and even step in at
Mm.
times and assist with that. And so I did, and I do think it has very much shaped my character, my work ethic, but my
Mhm.
grandparents also shaped my character and
Yeah.
my work ethic and seeing how they worked. And my mother and I have not always had the best relationship. We have not always gotten along the best, but I
Hmm.
could always look back and be grateful for her iron fist because it kept me out of situations
Hmm.
that I've seen other people end up in that
Right.
were not so favorable. So at the very least I could extend not only gratitude to her for that, and she was always adamant about you will respect me, but when you grow up and you have your own children, it takes that respect to a completely different level. And when you experience some of the same thing as she did as far as being the single parent and
Hmm.
everything being on you, it
Hmm.
gives you a completely different set of respect. And then I also have a incremental and exponential respect for her because she had this fully disabled son, and I remember her telling people how taking him to his different therapies and that and interacting with other parents of disabled children, how one woman really touched her because she said, you still have to build your life. You still
Yeah.
have to go out and you have to go back and get your education. And so I saw my mother do that, get 2 associate degrees
Hmm.
while raising these 3 kids. I saw her enter, the workforce at a higher level because she invested in herself with the education, and she didn't have any excuses about her life because she had me at 15 and was married by 18 and had 3 kids and
Right.
divorced probably by 25. She had no excuses, so she held us to the same standard that she held herself to.
Yeah. I love that because it really brings me to my next question, which is you got pregnant in high school. I think you said you had your child before graduation
Yes,
or
just
right
a few
after,
months. Yep, right
right?
before.
Okay, right around graduation time. Most of the world will tell you that you should have been in statistics. You should have ended up on welfare. You should have not been able to make it. You should not have been able to get a college degree. You should not have become the woman that you are today. And you already started to talk about your mother as a role model. What else do you think stirred within you so that you could get beyond that and not
I
turn into a
knew
statistic?
because this was the 80s and things were a lot different and attitudes were a lot different back then. So I knew what the statistics were, and I was determined.
Hmm.
I made my mind up that I would
Hmm.
not become a statistic. And I also have to give credit. I always say it was a blessing and it was a curse, but the blessing outweighed the curse. My family helped me, not so much financially, but they would babysit and they helped
Hmm.
care for my daughter, not only for me to get my education, but for me to build a career. Because
Hmm.
my first job out of college, I traveled a lot.
Okay.
And so my grandparents, my mom, my parents, everyone helped pitched in. My
Hmm.
grandfather would pick my daughter up from preschool
Yeah.
because he was retired. And so that's a huge piece of it is the village, having the village to support me.
And for me, that's so out old school because that's kind of how we grew up too. We
Hmm.
always had extended family. We had people who weren't really our relatives and we didn't know weren't our relatives because we called them aunties and uncles and things
Hmm.
like that. But family was so important as I was growing up. And it sounds like your family was there for you. And I think when I was growing up, I was so afraid of my parents, afraid to do anything wrong. And I
Mhm.
always thought if I got pregnant, that they would kick me out, right? I thought that was the worst thing that could ever happen because my parents were
Yes,
real funny about, like, you can't even date a boy. Like, we couldn't even have boyfriends, right? And
very
so
similar.
yeah. And so what I learned way after the fact, and I'm glad that I figured it out later in life, I figured out that if I would have had a child, my mother would have taken that child, she would have put that child under her wing, and she would have supported me to no end. But they can't tell you that before the fact.
Well,
But it
right.
sounds like your family did that for you.
They did. And, just a quick little side. Yeah, I was definitely afraid of telling my mother that I was pregnant. I was very far pregnant because I was very petite. I was very far into my pregnancy
Mm,
when my mother found out. She had suspicions and she knew, but I think she was afraid of the truth. So she didn't want to ask.
mhm.
And we'd suffered a tragedy. A cousin was gunned down at 18. And
Oh,
it came out during all of that I was pregnant. And I will never forget, and it definitely impacted how I raised my girls because my mother had me so young and dropped out of high school. And, when you're a child and she's warning you against that, it makes you sound like she doesn't love you. It makes it sound
mm,
like she regrets having you or that you ruined her life, but she just
mm,
didn't want to see me have the same struggles that she
mm,
did. And so it made me very, very afraid
mm,
to tell her because she
mm.
always made it sound like it was the end of the world and
Right.
that my life would be over. And so the hurt of the fact that I couldn't come to her and tell her,
Mm.
I will never forget that. And that made me always have open communication with
With
my
your daughters.
children, with my two
Yeah.
daughters, so that they know that no matter what happened, they could always,
Hmm.
always come to me and we would figure it out and we would work it out. That there was no mistake that they could make that they would not be able
Yeah.
to recover from.
That's
And again,
beautiful.
I don't think she meant it in a harmful way, but people were just different back then, right?
It's true. And they were secretive and they didn't
Yeah.
tell us stuff that we should have known.
Yes.
And when
Right.
I was growing up, nobody told you anything. You found out on the street, how
Yeah.
things should be done. And I'm not saying that we want to condone necessarily promiscuity or
Right.
any of that stuff, but the reality of life is that you have to talk to your children. You can't
Yeah.
allow them to be exposed to whatever the street will tell them because it's not
Right.
going to probably
Right.
be what you want to tell them.
Right. And my mother did have like the birds and the bees. And,
Hmm.
I remember when I got my period and her talking on the phone to friends. And I was like, I'm not doing that because she was like, well, when she gets her period, I'm putting her on birth control. Because, being parentified, you do tend to mature
Right.
before other people. And, so it wasn't just my period. Like I remember being like in 8th grade and hating to walk down the street because men who were way too old to be paying attention to me would be
Yeah.
catcalling.
So true.
And I didn't tell her that because she would, God only knows, she might have went to jail. So, she did have that, but there was just this very much of fear and this close communication because she was so strong in her words and her views and her
Yeah.
opinion that I just didn't
She
feel like I
lived
had a
it.
voice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I'm coming to understand being a parent myself is that we do the best that we can. We don't come with a manual. We do the best that we can. And no matter what you do to your children, they're going to think you broke them. You can love on
Absolutely.
them all you want, and they're
Hmm.
going to go to therapy telling their therapist how you somehow harmed them. And I'm
Yes.
not saying that we didn't. I'm saying we did the absolute best that we could. We all come into this world and get traumatized in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
And I think part of that defines who we end up being, right? Your
It's all part
mother,
of the path.
yeah, your mother, because of what she went through, raised you the way that she raised you. And
Mhm.
you, because of the way you were raised your daughters the way you raised them. And they're going to do the same when they get to have their own children.
And
They're
we'll
going to
have to
raise them
come
the
back.
best
I'll
that
have
they
to come
can.
back someday and talk about the whole intergenerational aspect because
Yeah,
that, oh my goodness,
it's
because you're
something
talking
else.
great grandparents,
Yeah,
my mom, the grandparent, and me, and
yeah.
then my daughter. Because my grandson, he was 6 when my grandmother passed away, so we had
Okay.
5 generations.
Wow.
So he remembers his great great
Isn't
grandmother.
that
He has his
something?
great
He was
grandmother.
six.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a
Like
blessing.
my grandkids, I think sometimes get confused, and I have to remind them that I'm their grandmother and my
Right.
mother is their great grandmother
Isn't
because
that
they call
something?
me Nana and her
Right.
grandma. So, that's
Yeah.
a whole other piece of it. And the it's like I said, it's very much a blessing and a curse. I always love the fact that because my children had access to my grandmother's father, and they passed away when my
That's
youngest was like
amazing.
3 or 4. So there's this
Right.
this very depth of history and
Right.
access that I think is very very vital to our story also.
I want to switch gears and now start talking about your career. So you mentioned that in high school you got to do the internship. Was that high
Yeah,
school or
right out of
college?
high school.
Right
Yeah,
out of
two
high
weeks after
school.
high school.
So you got to do an internship and that shaped who you are today. And I think that's interesting because so many of us come into this world and have no clue what we want to do with our lives, right?
Mhm.
So I remember I always wanted to do business because I have, people in my family who I'm going to call it bootstrap
Yeah.
businesses because my aunt, she was the kind of person who she sold food to the blue collar workers, down
Yeah.
the street,
Hmm.
or she sewed and she cooked and she baked and she did all of these things. And she might have been the one person in the world that when you needed something, she would go inside of her bosom and pull out something for you, right? Or she'll
Right.
go down into her stockings that were tied up at the calf and she'll pull something out for you. And I was always fascinated. No, nobody, these days would say that she was a successful business owner. I don't know how much money she had, but she always had something. They were
Yeah.
able to buy homes. You know what I mean? They were
Yeah.
able to do things and nobody gave them a loan. There was no business plan. There was none of that. She just intuitively knew that this was what she was going to do. She had skills and she did it. So I was always fascinated with that. And I always knew that I'd be a business person. And I went to, I went and got my business degree, undergrad, grad, and then went on to get my doctorate later on. But I just always knew. And as I hear you talking about having this experience with this entrepreneurship, I think, wow, what a blessing to be that young and to understand it because so many
Yeah.
young people have no clue what it is that they want to do.
Well, I initially wanted to be an attorney. Okay.
Hmm.
And so I remember, talking about pre-law with my guidance counselor in high school. And when I look back, I kind of am looking at him sideways about the advice that he gave me. But, it's like it has to be like senior year and I'm doing all the college admissions and everything because I'd always been on the pre-college track. So,
Hmm.
I had all the test scores, I had the transcript and everything to get into pretty much the college or university of my choosing. But here we find myself now, I'm pregnant and I'm having a baby. So
Hmm.
that's limiting my options. I had
Right.
family that said, hey, you can leave her with us and then go to college. And I was like, no, that's my baby. I'm raising my baby. I don't,
Hmm.
that I could see while that was a blessing, I could also
Right.
see how that could go. And I didn't
Right.
want to deal with that. I wanted to be who I wanted to raise my own child. And so we're sitting there in the office and we're talking and he's like, well, pre-law, there's not really much you do with a pre-law. You go to school for 4 years, you get out pre-law, and then hopefully you get into law school. And I'm sitting there calculating, well, I'm going to have this a 4-year-old by then, and she's going to need health insurance and she's going to need, all the things in life. And the one thing I promised my baby before having her, when I knew that I was having a baby and I would pretty much be having a baby by myself and that I would be solely responsible for her, I didn't want her to feel the pain
Hmm.
of being the product of a single mother. I didn't want her to have any less
Right.
financially, materially than any other children in her classes at school. And
Right.
so it was very important to me to get out of college in 4 years, not
Hmm.
5, because that's when
Hmm.
5 years, the 5-year plan really was a big thing or becoming a big thing. And I wanted to get out and be able to sustain and take care of her 100% on my own and provide her, like I said, with as equivalent of a life as a two-parent household as possible. So that was very important to me.
Hmm.
And I had participated in junior achievement in school and
Okay.
I liked it. And so the opportunity came up. I already had I could have graduated probably my junior year. I had
Mhm.
enough credits
Okay.
to graduate. I definitely didn't have to do two semesters for senior
Mhm.
year. I could have even just done one. So I actually, even after having my baby, went down to a half a day because I
Mhm.
had enough credits.
Okay.
And so that's when I began to do more electives. And
Mhm.
so I took marketing, I took accounting, I took typing, and I really liked marketing. And I
Mhm.
kind of knew what marketing was from when my mom was going and getting her associates in business admin. And,
Okay.
I would help her with her homework, and we would, discuss some of the things she was learning in school. So I kind of knew what marketing was. And I took this class and fell in love with it. And so it's like, well, pre-law is out because I got a baby now. Maybe that's something I'll do down the road, but I got a
Mm.
baby now. So marketing it was. And
Okay.
then the opportunity came. God just ordered my steps and the opportunity showed up. I never anticipated that. I actually was looking at doing a 2-year program, a 2-year associate's degree, and
Mhm.
then going to school and finishing up because I knew
Right.
there was a program that allowed me with community college to go for 2 years and take
Mhm.
and apply those
Right.
credits towards a BA. And the
Mhm.
only reason I didn't do that was I got scholarships and grants.
Awesome. One more thing, and believe it or not, we're just on the first question.
I know.
One of the things that I wanted to follow up on is how you then took what you had. How do you think what you did in that marketing arena when you first started, how did that translate into where you are now in creating the product or the service that you're offering?
Yeah, I would say it goes back before that because I worked at McDonald's
Mm,
in high school, and I learned a tremendous amount about marketing, sales, and leadership
hmm.
working at McDonald's. The manager at the time, he passed away right at really young at like 34 of colon cancer, but he was definitely and still continues to be Mike Witkowski. He still continues to be a huge influence in my life because of his leadership style and the things that I just learned in working at McDonald's. At McDonald's, I can say I learned inventory management. I learned production control. I learned protecting your brand from working at McDonald's. And then you compound that with what I learned working on a major consumer brand. And like I said, it definitely gave me a competitive edge working right out of undergrad because I remember sitting in undergrad in orientation, and there are other people who graduated from different colleges, and looking at them like, y'all just really have book knowledge. Y'all just only have book knowledge, and you really are lacking common sense. And so it gave me a huge competitive advantage because, again, being able to read about these principles in a book and then going and applying it in the real world is just like there's just nothing like it.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you've had such varied experiences, and it almost seems like God orchestrated
Yeah, pretty
everything
much.
as
Hmm.
it needed to be to get you where you are today. I am going to
Yes.
go ahead and go to our next question. What is your purpose, and how did you come to recognize it?
Oh, I think I'm still coming to recognize it. And I feel like my purpose again, I've learned a lot about the central nervous system in recent years, and my nervous system became very broken around 2012. And that's part of how I decided that corporate was no longer correct for me. And like I said, I lost my grandfather who's tattooed on my arm, and a
Mm,
very close cousin who's like a sister within weeks of each
wow.
other. Between that and working in a very toxic environment and raising these children on my own and all this pressure. Plus,
A
there's all
lot.
this family pressure too. There's a lot of pressure that I won't say I had a nervous breakdown, or anything like that. I think some people thought I was beginning to go crazy or whatever, but that, I didn't even understand what anxiety was when people would talk
Right.
about it before that. But I began to understand it through this process. And it took a very long time for me to recover from burnout. And
Mm,
then recovering from burnout was one thing, but then I had to not only learn to rebuild my
mm.
nervous system, I had to learn to trust my nervous system and
Wow.
my instincts and my intuition again.
Okay.
And I really think that's the process
Hmm.
that combined my purpose, that combined with all this wisdom, knowledge, and experience, like you said, that God
Hmm.
has orchestrated to
Hmm.
lead other women and help them through. I never saw myself as being the forefront or being celebrity or famous or anything like
Right.
that. I'm really a behind the scenes
Mm-hmm.
kind of person. But for some reason, here we are, and I'm on a podcast. And it's
Well,
not
and
the
I'm
first one,
happy
and it
that you're
won't be the
here.
last one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's a piece of my purpose that is showing up,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's
Mm-hmm.
just it's showing up, and
Yeah.
there's a presence in something that people see. I
Yeah.
don't intend it. It just happens. I did
Yeah.
go to the School of the Arts and was in theater, and
Right.
that, not that I'm performing because I'm anti-performance,
Mm-hmm.
but it gave me the confidence, it gave me the ability to be able to do the public speaking and stand up. And
Yeah.
I'm a Hamilton. Okay. If you would lived locally, you would know a thing or two about the Hamiltons, and we
Okay.
have voices and
Okay.
we're not afraid to use them. We can be
Awesome.
very stubborn. In fact, I've seen entrepreneurship, especially in the Hamilton side
Mm-hmm.
of my family. My grandmother has had sisters who's had restaurants, who had, the candy store. My uncle owned a barber shop. I have several cousins in that who have had their own beauty salons and
Mm-hmm.
stores. So I've always seen entrepreneurship, but it wasn't the thing that my family taught me to grow up and be. They
Mm-hmm.
taught me to get the good education, get a good job.
Yes, indeed. So
So,
it's
but
in the
when,
DNA and they couldn't hide. It sounds like it to me.
yeah, yeah, I think it was always there, but my immediate family really freaked out.
Yeah.
They weren't
Well,
feeling the entrepreneurship thing because they believed it was go to school, get a good education,
right.
get a good job, and they didn't know that we would face just as much, if not more, workplace
Oh my gosh.
trauma.
The
Yes.
discrimination is
Hmm.
real.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that your family wasn't, I'm going to just say it this way, wasn't truly supportive when you first announced that you were going to be an entrepreneur. When we're first coming out here as entrepreneurs, especially if we're doing startup, if we're doing bootstrap, there's no guarantee of success. And if
Mhm.
your experience is anything like my experience, it's feast or famine.
It
There are
is. Yeah.
times
Or
when
has been. Yeah. Hmm.
everything is awesome, the clients are coming, and we're doing the work and we look up and that contract or that situation is gone. And if we haven't been marketing, if we haven't been keeping that pipeline going, then we have to go out and market. And when you're marketing, you're not earning. And
Right.
so you have to figure out some kind of
Mhm.
balance. And so I'm just excited about us getting to know each other a little bit more because I think we both have this passion for really supporting women on that journey. Let me ask you.
Absolutely. And I want to speak to a couple things. Number one,
Mhm,
it was very challenging for me because my entire life I always had family support.
mhm,
No matter what I did, I was like the golden child. I could do no wrong. My grandmother, if she was alive today and she met you, she'd say that's my number one grandchild. My aunties, they will tell you, the ones who are deceased and the ones who are alive, that she
mhm,
made me an auntie. That's my firstborn niece. So I always had
mhm.
this very special, elevated, I hate to use the word elevated, but this very esteemed
Yeah.
position within the
Mhm,
family, right? And what I've come to learn was, I don't think it was so much about entrepreneurship. I think it was just the unknown, right? Because
mm,
not only is it entrepreneurship, but it's unknown. There's this whole internet digital thing that they just don't understand. If
mhm,
I'd been starting a restaurant or a brick and mortar business, something more traditional that they
mhm.
could see and touch, I think the support may have been
Okay.
different. I think
Mm,
in their eyes, they're looking at it like she's got master's degrees, and I wasn't selling Avon, but in their mind, it was the equivalent
mm,
of she's out here selling Avon. They
right.
didn't know that I was learning and building on to the MBA,
Mhm,
learning skills that are going to pay me for
mhm,
years. I was talking with a client this morning, and I work with her on behalf of her autistic daughter that
mm,
it has really grown some social influence and
mhm.
wants to monetize it. And she's
Okay.
like, the most amazing thing about all of this is her video editing skills. People don't understand that when you're doing this, not social work in terms of social work, but this technological, this marketing digitally and
Right.
online and virtual, the amount of skills that you are actually learning
Mhm,
and deploying within your business. And when you are selling a product, whether it's your own product or someone else's, there's customer service, there's leadership, you're
so
everything.
much.
You're wearing all these
So
different
much.
hats and learning all these different things, including for me, video editing. I built my own WordPress websites. I've,
Mhm.
built sales funnels and
Mhm.
all these things that at the end of the day, come feast or famine, I will never be broke because there's always some skill that I have that I can go out and market and sell that
Absolutely.
someone else does not have and is willing to pay me for. And I
Absolutely.
can name my own price for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you are so right. Being an entrepreneur, especially when you're a solopreneur, you have to wear so many hats. You have to really learn it. And then eventually, when you get a team, you know exactly what to tell them to do, right? So,
Exactly.
if you're editing your videos right now, then you know exactly what to ask the VA or
Mhm.
your intern to do. And so I think it's
Exactly.
really important that we understand that in these early stages, we're building skills. The other thing I want to say is that we take a lot of the skills that we got from working in the various organizations that we worked in, right? And
Absolutely.
I know for a fact you, like me, went up the ranks, and we may
Mhm.
or may not have been recognized for, our
Mhm.
contributions, and people may have been promoted around us or whatever. However, those leadership skills that you got in those arenas, you bring it to this business now. And for me, that has been invaluable. I mean, I got an opportunity to lead in so many different aspects, and we could tell each other stories about how we may or may not have been treated, because in some
Mhm.
cases it was
Right.
disrespectful, to be honest. But they can't take those skills away from us.
They
What we
Mhm.
acquired in those arenas, they can't take that away from us.
Cannot
And
take it
we
away
can
from
take
us.
that and apply that and build on it here in this
Exactly.
perspective.
Education and they can't
Oh
take
my
the
gosh,
education
not at all.
away from you. It's like uh, we always say everyone always says we're the most educated demographic. When we look at education
Hmm.
attainment rates, we attain education as a percentage of our overall
Right.
demographic at the highest rate. What we don't talk about is how overeducated many of us are. We
We
are
have to be, though, right? We were told. I mean, I'll give you an example, and it makes me sick to my stomach. But in one of the jobs that I had, I was hired alongside a white male. I was older. He was about 20 years younger.
Mhm.
I had about 20 years of experience. He probably had 10. And we got hired at the exact same salary, even though I was well far more experienced than
Yeah.
him. Here's the caveat, though. We started together and we ended together. We tracked for 7 years, and my salary went like this because I performed well. And
Mhm.
each year, my raises and things like that reflected that, and his kind of stayed flat. So if anybody were to look at it, in retrospect, they would have said, that was not the same hire. You know what I mean? Like they
Right.
thought that they were getting equivalent.
And you're very fortunate in that because that's not always the case
True.
for us. Working in financial services, there were mediocre white males moving through the ranks pretty
True.
fluidly.
It's pretty
And
common.
not just black women being, stagnated. I knew a white woman who had been hired externally and they really lowballed her
Mm-hmm.
at her starting salary. And so for you to see your
Yeah.
income go like this, your
Yeah.
salary, whereas often my experience and what I tell people is always negotiate. When
Mm-hmm.
you go in,
Mm-hmm.
that is your best time to negotiate because you will never be able to make up if you
Yeah.
get that starting
So true.
salary wrong in a lot of cases. And so for you to be able to, you know, do this, but they
Yeah.
still gypped you in the beginning.
Yeah,
And
they
how do you
did.
ever make that up?
Yeah, it's so true. Let's go to the next question, which is about your faith. I want to understand how your faith influences the work that you do, your values, and the way that you make strategic
Now
decisions.
we're getting to the good stuff.
The good
Okay. So I'm
stuff.
going to go back to the last question because it was the perfect segue to faith. And one of the things that I've learned in the last couple years that I've really reconciled, and I actually want to go back a little further because you talked about this a little bit already, and then just remind me to come back here. You
Mm-hmm.
talked about trauma and the fact that we all raise our children and we don't have a manual. And one of the things, and this is all interconnected, is part of my healing journey, because I remember I said there's been this pattern, not only in workplace, but in being overworked and in relationships and, getting taken advantage of, or just like unequally yoked relationships. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just call it that. And one of the things, I saw something on Facebook or Instagram around 2020, and it said, I was able to forgive my parents when I
Mm-hmm.
finally understood that they were not only doing the best they could with what they had, but they had their own unhealed trauma that they are constantly working through. And that really touched me. And remember, we talked a little about that intergenerational.
Mm-hmm.
Those wounds sometimes
Mm-hmm.
not only show up like genetically DNA, or like, what do they call it, generational curses.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the way that one generation almost pits another generation against each other. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just say that. And so it's something I've had to really talk to my children about, like, hey, not only did I do the best that I could with what I had, but the way you see me be compassionate with my mother, it would be nice for you to also show me some compassion,
Yeah.
because I did the best that I could with what I had. And you, my oldest, yes, you saw me grow. We kind of grew up together.
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge that, and I recognize that there are definitely things that I wanted to do differently, but unfortunately, because I had no other model, and I didn't have Instagram back then, I didn't have Facebook, that
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have the tools and resources to help me to be able to do them differently. But when it comes to your children, that is why I choose to do this and this. As we're talking
Mm-hmm.
here, a text message just popped up on my phone. My grandson just sent me an apology.
Okay. Love
you
the
know,
apology. Love that.
yeah. And because of I love my grandchildren to pieces, but I don't tolerate disrespect. And
Mm-hmm.
so he apologized for something he did. And he's 99.99999% of the time the sweetest, most adorable person, but he's in puberty.
Okay.
So he got a little disrespectful earlier this week, and and so I corrected him with love, in a much different way than I would have done my children back in the day,
Mm.
because I now have better tools
Yeah.
and resources. And so faith has played a role in my journey, in that I was very disappointed in a lot of family members when I began my entrepreneurial journey, because I come from a family that has, I mean, we didn't just have like a gospel choir of a handful of people. The gospel choir in my family was tens of people, because my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother's family is huge. She's one of 11
Mm-hmm.
children, and all of my mom and her first cousins grew up very close, and then we all grew up very close with them and their children and their grandchildren. And so I was very disappointed in their lack of faith, not only in me, but in that God obviously had a plan for my life. And they were trying to push me in the direction that they thought I
Mm-hmm.
should go, and not in the direction that God was clearly putting me on and
Right.
steering me toward. I will also say there was a pivotal moment, a core memory, in God put the right mentors in front of me, and we were on a webinar, and one of them, Tracy, she was very outspoken and
Mm-hmm.
very about her religion and her faith,
Mm-hmm.
and she decided to pray. And I'm very cautious about people praying over me.
Right.
I don't just
Gotta
let
know the
anybody
spirit.
touch me, and yeah, and I don't let anybody pray over me, but I knew her spirit, and
Mm-hmm.
she prayed. And when I tell you, the impact to my business was immediate,
Wow.
almost immediate. I was like, okay, I think that's what's missing from your business.
Amen. Gotta be at the core. It's gotta be right there
Yes.
at the center. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Like, I'm expecting other people to have it, but where is it
Mm-hmm.
for me? And that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the things I was going to say earlier, is, like, you took that job when they lowballed you. They should have paid you more. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that I've learned in my faith walk, is if it ain't right, be willing to walk away from it.
Mm-hmm.
I made a lot of decisions in my career
Mm-hmm.
to take the job and to even stay, because I had these children that I
Mm-hmm.
had to take care of, and I didn't want them on welfare. I
Right.
didn't want them in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
When now I've learned God's got my back. That was my grandma's mantra as she was getting older and sick, and knew her time was nearing, was God's got my back. God's
Mhm.
got me. And so
Mhm.
she left me that message, and I carry that message forward now, that God's got me, that I might not know where the next client is from, but I
Mhm.
know that if I do these activities, and I know if I keep showing up,
Mhm.
God's going to circle back. He's going to circle the block, and
Mhm.
he's going to put me in front of the right people. And here we are.
It's so interesting because I've been saved since I was 13 years old. So I really don't kind of remember what it feels like not to know the Lord. But one thing I
Mhm.
can say is that He always, no matter what it looks like right now, He always works it out. And so I have this little image in my head, the whole Bible verse about faith without works is dead, right? So you
Yes.
can have faith and you can keep saying, oh, God's going to bless me. God's going to work it out. God's going to do anything. You could be watching TV all day long. And I'm sorry, I don't know. Maybe it will work out. I'm not sure.
Right.
But I also believe that it is not your works that's doing it, right? So my
Right.
thing in my head is this. I'm a very hard worker. And what I do is, God makes me a promise and I believe him. I
Mhm.
believe that he's going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. I don't know what time frame he's going to do it.
Right.
I don't know how he's going to do it, but I believe he is going to do it, right? And so then I go to work, not because I'm trying to make it happen, but because I guess maybe in a way you got to busy yourself and get distracted. Maybe that's part of it. But what I
Yeah.
do is I look up across the street and I see him blessing across the street and I run over there and get my blessing, right? Because I'm not sure that anything that I'm doing is really making it happen, but I also don't want to be idle. I also don't want to just sit there and say, well, God is going to, we as Christian women, we believe by faith, the Bible tells us we can move mountains. But I don't
Mhm.
think it's the same thing as the new age manifesting, which is I'm just going to speak and I'm going to visualize and it's just going to show up in front of me. And I wish that it worked that way. If it worked that
Right.
way, it would be so much easier. And we would
Yeah.
know that it was going to happen. But
Yeah.
for me, it happens differently. God says A, and I have to believe it. And one of the things that I have learned throughout the course is that you can't anti-pray. You have to, if God said this is the way it's going to be, then you got to speak that thing. And when it doesn't look like it, you got to keep speaking it. An example I have is when I lived in Colorado, everything was falling apart in my life and I lost my job. Yet again, I lost my job and I was an HR manager at the time and I was helping everybody else get settled, figure out what they were going to do next. And somebody said to me, Andrea, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, I'm moving to Washington, D.C. And they said, oh, that's great. You got a job. And I was like, no. Well, how do you know? And I was like, well, God told me I'm moving to Washington, D.C. I'm moving to Washington, D.C. I said that thing so many times. I think I really believed it. So that was part of it. And believing is seeing, and seeing is believing. But I said that thing so many times that in the end, I had two interviews that all I had to do was do like phone interviews. And I had my choice of jobs in Washington, D.C. I don't know how that happens because I didn't know the people. Somebody was like, oh, I want you to talk to this person, or here's another opportunity, like literally fell in my lap. And sometimes I think that worked, and I have numerous stories like that. And I ended up living in
Mhm.
Washington, D.C. I've been here
Yeah.
for 26 years now that I've lived here. And I was living in Colorado speaking that thing because I believe God told me that.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think when we're going through this current situation where things don't look like they're going to work out in our favor, if we could just remember what God did, if we could just
Mhm.
remember how many times He came through for us, how many times His promises were true, then we would know not
Right.
to worry. But human
And that's
beings, we
exactly it.
worry in the moment.
Mhm. That's exactly it. Like I'd always had that, right? I'd
Hmm.
always had that where I always knew it would work out for me, and at one point it even felt like I had the golden touch, but I think also I got too cocky and I forgot that God was working in my life and I thought it
Hmm.
was me doing all the things. And
Got
so
to be
he had to
careful with
show
that.
me
Yeah.
that on it and a part of it. And so I just went through this very scary, because it was feast or famine, and I wasn't used to that, because even growing
Yeah.
up in a single parent household, we always had lights.
Mm-hmm.
We always
Mm-hmm.
had heat.
Mm-hmm.
We always had the necessities.
Right.
I never went without a meal. I never
Yes.
went without anything,
Yeah.
So, that was very challenging to my
Mm-hmm.
spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to, work through that and learn. And then I came across someone that I wouldn't mention because ideologically I think there's just a lot of flaws there, but they
Mm-hmm.
did introduce me to Jesus CEO and making God your business partner. And I think
Okay.
that has really made a huge and significant impact. As we discussed before, I'm not overly
Mm-hmm.
religious or
Mm-hmm.
dogmatic, but
Mm-hmm.
I do believe, because number one, I was raised to,
Right.
and I just do. So I do believe I
Mm-hmm.
might be a little more free spirited and
Right.
less dogmatic about it, but
Mm-hmm.
faith, gratitude, mercy, grace are definitely a part of my daily life.
Amen. So, what impact do you hope to make through the work that you're doing? And I think this would be a good place for us to understand your offer a little bit more.
Yeah.
The Luminary Path, if you would tell us just a little bit more about that.
So the Luminary Path, again, was created to help lead women through what was projected to be a very tough economic and financial time. And, it looks a little cloudy now because things are not being reported honestly. And for some of us, because we're walking a certain path and stay prayerful and faithful, it doesn't look and feel like it should, right?
Mm.
The reality doesn't match. There's some mismatch there. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was created to be. It was created to be a 6-month group mastermind, and it wound up being a bunch of women that I wound up working with one on one. And so the
Okay.
next step is going to be to get the group mastermind piece
Mm-hmm.
of it going. But for right now, I think my hands are more than full with my client load. I only
Mm-hmm.
have room for one or two more on a one-to-one basis, and then I still have my hands in other things
Mm-hmm.
that I do. And so the hope of the impact of my work has always been about Tamira in 2013.
Mm.
The broken, the hurt, the overworked, the underpaid Tamira,
Mm-hmm.
and who is that today, and finding her and
Mm-hmm.
helping her get out of that situation, because I know the impact of grandmothers. Both of my grandmothers were very instrumental in my life. Unfortunately, one passed. Like, I had a baby in February, my grandmother passed away in
Mm.
March on my dad's side,
Mm-hmm.
but they were actually very good friends, and I had that village and that support. My children got off of school, and my grandmother she knew someone who worked at the bus company, and she arranged for the bus to pick them up and drop them off in front of her house because she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't walking to a bus stop. And they
Right.
came home from school to the loving hands and arms of their grandparents. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so much that I could talk about, going back to work, because that was just when FMLA had started, and I
Mm-hmm.
was out of time, and my baby had to go to the doctor regularly for her well checkup. I asked my grandmother to take her one time, and she took her every time
Wow.
since then. And my grandfather, it was their thing. I think it helped keep them alive longer,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
completely honest with you. So my bigger picture belief is, honestly, if we have more children who are able to grow up with that type of experience, the better off the Black community will be. And
Mm-hmm.
if the Black community does better, society does better
Mm-hmm.
overall. So what can I do to help the mother, to help the grandmother, to help
Mm-hmm.
the auntie who doesn't have children,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can create that for the
Mm-hmm.
children, so that they grow up with that support, that love, that care, that safety, that security,
Mm-hmm.
that calm nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
that someone is fully present in their life, meaning when they're in front of them, they're there, not thinking about work, not thinking about all these other things, but they're
Right.
focused and thinking about them. So that's what the ultimate goal and mission of my work is about.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow. And so that's the vision you have when you think about somebody looking back at this, what legacy do you want to leave behind? What do you want people to say about you?
What I want people to say about me is she couldn't fix it going backwards.
Take your time.
She couldn't fix it going backwards. She could only fix it going forward.
Mm,
And so, to my grandchildren, those are the people I want to hear in the future.
mm,
I did the best I could with what
mhm,
I had, and I learned from that to do it differently with you. And what I hope and what I already see is that I teach you how to regulate your nervous system, how to
mm,
make decisions for
mhm,
your future self, not just the self that you are in right now, and that you have the faith that it will all work out, that you will get there, and
mhm,
just keep your nervous system calm and continue to build on that for the generations
mhm.
to come, for the longevity of the bloodline. That is
Wow,
what I go to sleep with every night.
I love that. And so I heard you say a number of times already in our conversation about the nervous system. And I think what it brings up for me is the fact that we have so much trauma, not just in our families, but in our DNA going way, 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 way back. And particularly as Black women, we're carrying a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
And they're
we
attacking us. Let's be real.
and
They're
in
attacking us
today's
daily.
society, there's the statistic that I guess it's 300,000 or 400,000 Black women have lost their jobs. And so, and I think both you and I cater to those very Black women because they're now pivoting to something new. And no matter how successful you have been in your former arena, this is something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I liken it to when you start a new job and everything feels fuzzy and you don't know the people and you don't know where the bodies are buried and you don't know where the coffee maker is. You don't even barely know where the bathroom is and everything feels strange. And then a year later, they're
Right.
sending people to you to tell people what to do. So we're going to be okay. We just
Yeah.
have to get started and we can't be afraid to get started. I feel like I'm going to say it for you as well. I feel like we're on assignment.
Mm-hmm.
God put us in those organizations before so we could understand how organization works. And now we're out here on assignment helping other women. And for me, color, it doesn't have, it's not just Black
Right.
women. I'm really focusing on Christian women, but we're on assignment to make sure that people can live the lives that God has called them to live. And so you talked about the nervous system, and I think that there is a lot of trauma that we are carrying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nobody attending to that. Not really. We're
Right.
told to produce, perform, do this and show up and be successful and post everywhere and do everything. And, one of the things that I focus on is like, okay, let's step back from all of that. Let's, focus on just one thing, right? And I think what I'm hearing you say is there is some healing work that you're doing. It may not be like you might not be leading with that, but it sounds like
Right.
to work with you, there is some healing that's going to take place that we don't have to come and traumatize and harm ourselves even more, that we can maybe come in traumatized, bruised and abused by the system and really find a different path.
And that's the purpose I was speaking about, because it took a very long time for me to understand that I'm one of those people that God created for other people to be able to plug into and ground.
Mm,
I'm introverted for one. That was very, very challenging for me. And I fought it for a
mm,
very, very long time. And how he got me here is they pay me to tap into it, to tap into my nervous system and to ground me. So there's some exchange so that, and then I've also learned the boundaries so that I'm not being depleted. And I know we are over time, so I'm just
we
gonna
are.
personally end with this. When it comes to impact in all of this, it's the alpha and the omega. It's full circle. It begins where it ends, and it began with my grandmothers. And
Mhm.
in everything that I do, it's to honor them, because I want to be who I am without them. And believe it or not, both of them, without both of them, my mother wouldn't be who she is,
Mm-hmm.
without both of them supporting her, and supporting her by way of supporting me. And because I overheard conversations, and my mother could pick up the phone and call my paternal grandmother at any point and be very honest with her, and they
Mm-hmm.
both were very vested and yoked to
Mm-hmm.
me. That it's very part of why I did not want to go back to corporate America once I had a grandson was because my children didn't go to daycare and I didn't want him going to daycare. So it's about honoring the grandmother.
Awesome. Well, you are right. We are over time, but here's a request that I'd like to make. I only got halfway through the interview, so if
I'm
you would like to
sorry.
come back, no, this has been a great conversation. If you'd like to come back so
I
that we
would.
can continue this conversation, I would love to do a part two with you. We can look at the schedule and figure that out. I
Okay.
really do appreciate this opportunity to engage with you, to learn about you. I want you to share your website or your contact information or anything that you'd
Yeah.
like to share with the
If you
audience.
go to my website, that's going to be the easiest place, and you can find me, find my Facebook and everything from there. And that is my first name, last name. And do you have show notes?
I don't.
Okay, so it's Tamira, Tam as in Mary, which
Hmm.
is also my great grandmother's last name. I mean first name. So Tam as in Mary, Ira,
Hmm.
last name Hamilton, like
Hmm.
money.com. And
Okay.
you can hit contact and find me there, and all my socials are there also.
Awesome. We'll put it up on the screen. TamaraHamilton.com.
Yes.
Hamilton like money. I love that.
Yeah.
Have a good one. Take
Thank
care. God bless
you.
you.
Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.